Well, hey, welcome back to my video blog, Search for Forrest Gold, Wanderlust. So, I wanted to talk about a bunch of things, but sometimes I ramble on, and I wanted to use some of my pictures and make a point rather than just rambling on about pictures. I think two or three points that I wanted to talk about. One of them in specific has to do with something that I noticed about the geography of the four states in which the alleged treasure is hidden. This treasure is hidden in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, or New Mexico, allegedly north of Santa Fe, excluding the southern part of New Mexico. So, some of the things that I've noticed about these regions that makes me, and I think any searcher should think about this. So here, let me rack up this picture. Oh, and before I get away from this, is that this is just south of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and there's this road out there, and I was driving through there, and I saw the road. It's a, we all know from Forrest Fenn's poem. If you don't, um, so yeah, in the poem, uh, if you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down, your quest to cease, but tarry scant and marvel gaze. Just take the chest and go in peace. And so there's this road, Terry Ranch Road. Yeah, ha ha ha. But it is interesting that there's this like RV bison park, and there's all these things about home of the bison um, out there. But my point that I wanted to make in this particular video, and have a good time with the Forrest Fenn thing. I think a lot of people get really, really serious with with the Forrest Fenn search thing, and I am a bit of it too. But I think I agree with some of the other people. It's a hobby, and you need to think about it like that, and that's a whole nother line of thought. But here, let's wrap this up. So I saw some other thing on Reddit, and somebody else was talking about it the other day too. And one of the things that kind of hit me over that I've always realized when I was out doing boots on the ground and doing all these drives is the geography of the land. And there's some things that if you're living in North Carolina or South Carolina, or you're coming from Maine, or, and I'm not saying, even if you're coming from Southern California or San Francisco Bay Area or even Oregon. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with, big wide open spaces, but there's definitely something about when you get out into these four states that it is kind of big land, and that's the point I'm kind of trying to get to is that you start seeing places like this, in the search area, just big grasslands, and a lot of kind of flat open, even though you can sort of see the beginning of Cheyenne over the horizon here, the city of Cheyenne, but a lot of like two-lane roads and more of this kind of stuff. A lot of this kind of stuff where it's just, 50 miles, 100, 70, 80, 100 miles of these kind of two-lane roads across this open grasslands. So then the next thing that you see a lot of is, and my point, and I'm struggling to make the point, is that when you go out into these four states, you see a lot of kind of the same thing in different ways. And the things you see is you see big open grasslands, right? And you see a lot of rocks. Rocks, okay? And if you're not seeing rocks, you're seeing this. You're seeing trees. Lots and lots of trees. Lots and lots of, in particular, lots of every possible kind of fir or pine tree that you can think of. I mean, I've driven across all four states multiple times in some cases on boots on the ground, multiple states in multiple trips, some not. But the point is that my gosh, I have seen unending number of pine trees of every kind of shape, Douglas tree, you name it. I mean, I looked it up. There's dozens of these different kinds of pine trees in different regions. But the point is, lots of trees, lots of rocks, lots of grassland, and I like to call it lots of complex situations, such as this. Where it's a river valley. There's actually is a kind of a, I think they called it. It may have been a smaller pond or lake. I think it was a smaller lake off to the side there. But I mean, what you don't see here is another thing, that complexity of this nature is that there's a lot of things going on. And another thing too is that the distances are deceptive. Is what you think looks like it could just be a few minutes away is an hour hike from here over to those that rock formation across this forest. And when you walk across there, you're going to run into all sorts of diversity of animals, things, different rocks, creeks, that you have to ford. Lots of different things in nature. And so, I mean, that's my point. Is that's another thing you run into a lot into these in the four search states is mountain ranges, or I don't know how to put them, but smaller ranges or regions where there is uplifting or mountainous areas that are not trivial. I mean, they are huge expanses of open space. Many of them are, BLM land or national park, national forests. And then you also have to be cognizant of that it could be Indian lands. What is what. Usually it's pretty clear what is what, but I have to admit, like in the Wind River area, it was sort of, if you go look at the Wind River Reservation, it's not very clear when you drive through there, what is, whose land is whose land. Another thing that you see a ton of, and I'm going to use this, and I have some other illustrations of it too, is you see, oh, maybe that's not it. Well, I was going to say the other thing that you run across a lot of is barbed wire fencing. But another thing that you run across when you're out on the road on boots on the ground is you run across monuments, national monuments, and this just happens to be a very famous one. And actually, it was one of my solves, and out here in southern Wyoming, and that's another. Here's another example of wide open grasslands, and the problem with this is going back to the barbed wire thing. Here's the national this monument, which is a very large monument. Some of them are smaller, some are bigger, and they definitely can be distractions. And so I think that's going into my point about you have grasslands, you have rocks, you have trees, and I know it sounds ridiculous. Like, yeah, there's rocks and trees. Good, good job, Paul, for pointing that out. But I'm just saying that there's all these different and then there's the topology of the land. There's these wide open spaces with green land, and then the thing that I keep running into is that, yeah, there are fences. You know, barbed wire. I tell you something. Somebody made millions, if not millions and millions of dollars selling barbed wire because it is just everywhere. And the problem is, there is a ranch house out here, and there's a barn, and there's barbed wire here. Is who owns this land out here? And I know somebody's going to say you can look it up on a map. You should have looked it up on a map. I'm just making the point though that there's these different land topologies, and it it can be sort of this dizzying array of where would you hide this thing. And another point I wanted to make that I've made before, and I still think it's relevant, is when you get out there, is you run into dirt roads. And this site, this is actually the where I was at the other site. It's the Medicine Bow mountain range, and this is the Turtle Mountain. But you have to drive 3, 4 miles out on this dirt road to get to this monument. I think another problem that you run into is scale. If I can illustrate this here with just this picture, if I zoom in, maybe I could do it with the other picture. So scale. So if you look at this picture and we look at it kind of zoomed in, you say, that's not so bad, right? But when you zoom out to the full size of it, you realize there's problems with scale and getting to places again. So I think this picture illustrates another problem, or many of the problems that I'm talking about, is that somewhere out here there's a barbed wire fence. I think you can see the line, but from where I am here, there's no barbed wire fence. Okay, but you face all many of the problems that I just talked about. Is that it's a big wide open space. Okay, it's grassland. There's lots of diversity. There's rocks. There's small little rivers and tributaries. It's walkable, but this looks like it's not that far. But really, this could take some. It could take you a good. It could take maybe a half hour to 45 minutes just to kind of walk up here to this area. Let alone find your way up over this hill. I mean, you're looking at least an hour hike out, and it's a pretty, like I said, a pretty long and diverse hike out there. And you better check on maps and make sure you're not wandering onto someone's private property or land who may not be too happy about you stomping around on their property. Even though this is definitely out in the middle of kind of the middle of nowhere, southern Wyoming. Um, and then and it has all many of the problems. It doesn't have many trees, but it has many of the problems that I'm talking about. Is that there's just a lot of diversity, and then you run into the issue that I was trying to talk about on another video, and I think this video might be running kind of rambly too. Is that if you hike all the way the heck out here, and I guarantee you, as the crow flies, this is at least a mile, if not further. So you go over this ridge, and then maybe there's some other canyon down, and you walk maybe another mile. I mean, now you're over 2.5 miles out, okay? And a mistake that people make is you're gonna have to come back. If you're tired, or you kind of spent from that trip, I guarantee you another thing. If you hiking out to these areas, you're not just going to go in a straight line. I mean, you're going to have to zigzag, maybe over the topology and land, and you may see something over here and walk all the way over and realize it's nothing, have to walk all the way back then. So even though as the crow flies, it might be a mile and a half, 2 miles, you may put in 4 or 5 miles getting out, and then realize that you're going to have to hoof it at least 2 miles back. That's a lot of walking. If you're not prepared for that, um, and you're not in shape, these could be real problems for the average person who's armchairing it. And I put myself in that camp. And it occurs to me when I'm standing there looking at this thing saying, hey, that's got a bunch of things that are good solves. But, you know, you definitely have to have a plan if you're heading out there. And I know I'm rambling all over the place, but I think I'm trying to make the point about. I mean, here's another place that was a search area, and I mean, to get to this point, it took me a good hour. Now, I was exploring some of the other aspects of this area, but it took quite a while to hike out here, and a good 35, 40 minutes to hike back. Another thing too is that you think that you could just look anywhere, but I mean, you'd be surprised how often there's a sign posted somewhere that says, or a strict warning about removing anything from sites on these lands and being prosecuted. Now, on the same token, nobody's around. I mean, if you found the box underneath this wall, I don't know, you could be discreet about it. And I think when you get finally to a site like this, you're getting down to, like, all those other things I showed you were kind of macro, and there's this complexity of trees and lands, and having to go out to get to these sites, and then you finally get down to a site like this, and it's like, if it if the box was in this picture, could you point it out? Can you find it in this picture? Is it, is that the reason why people have walked right by it? All right. Like my videos, subscribe. Thanks for listening.